Welcome to episode 2 of The 6 Shifts with Jan Berkins and Kari Yates, co-authors of Shifting the Balance, 6 Ways to Bring the Science of Reading into the Balanced Literacy Classroom, published by Stenhouse. In this series, Jan and Kari, with Stenhouse's Dan Tobin, address misconceptions and misunderstandings that have discouraged educators from incorporating the science of reading into the balanced literacy classroom. In our previous episode, Jan and Kari shared the story behind Shifting the Balance and their experience rethinking their teaching. In our second episode, Jan, Kari, and Dan dig into the first shift, rethinking how reading comprehension begins.
Welcome back. Before we dive into chapter 1 of Shifting the Balance, let's start by taking a second and talking about the book as a whole and how you decided to focus on one of those central tensions in literacy instruction.
Dan, choosing this project meant really choosing to challenge ourselves to embrace rather than resist the current tension in the field. Doing that, we knew though meant we had to be willing to ask ourselves some really hard questions along the way. For instance, one question we realized early on that we were going to need to ask ourselves was whether some of our current seemingly really logical practices were driven more by intuition about how reading appears to work from the outside than they are driven by the science of how reading actually works inside the brain.
And Dan, this wondering or this insight about reading from the outside in versus reading from the inside out, which originally comes from the work of Marilyn Adams, really helped us see some possibilities for revising our practices. Because while it can look like kids are doing one thing when they read, what is actually going on in their brains just in microseconds often turns out to be quite different. So one thread throughout the book is turning our thinking from outside in assumptions to some inside out realities.
As we turn to chapter 1 on reading comprehension, I was somewhat surprised to see that the focus of the first chapter was on reading comprehension. I thought you might start with the foundational skills first and work up to reading comprehension. So what was behind that decision?
Dan, that's a great question. And actually, we were really intentional about starting the book with meaning making because we're balanced literacy educators. And we wanted to make it really clear to readers that you can teach the print system systematically and still hold close to meaning. And we saw this opportunity to sort of begin the book with the end in mind.
Yes, and finding meaning in text is really the whole point of print in the first place. The alphabetic system was invented to convey meaning. The central role of meaning in learning to read is actually a point of agreement on both sides, if you will, of this conversation, even if one or the other may have trouble seeing it at a given time.
One of the big ideas in the chapter is that we tend to underestimate the role language comprehension plays in reading comprehension. What were some of the misunderstandings you discovered as you wrote this chapter?
Each of the chapters throughout the book is organized with the first half having misunderstandings sort of unpacked and clarified. And there were a couple of misunderstandings about comprehension that really captured our attention. And the first was misunderstanding 1 of this chapter, which is that reading comprehension begins with print, when in fact it simply doesn't. Reading comprehension begins at or even before birth as the human brain is hearing and learning to comprehend spoken language in the world around us. Because print is nothing more than spoken language written down, we think of it as sort of freeze-dried language. Understanding print takes a lot more than being able to just decipher those little marks on the page. It's dependent upon a child's ability to understand spoken language. So in chapter 1, we explain some of the critical ways the brain is wired for oral language comprehension and how that becomes the foundation for success with reading comprehension later on.
And then another misunderstanding that really just felt like a huge insight for us was misunderstanding 4 in chapter 1, which is this idea that successful comprehension in beginning reading text means that reading comprehension is on track. We tend to assess reading comprehension in the early grades with texts that match students' decoding capabilities, while their language comprehension is typically far beyond that. It just doesn't take much language to comprehend early decodable or early predictable texts. So we get a false positive for reading comprehension that reveals itself when kids hit late second grade or early third grade, and we find ourselves saying, wait a minute, this child was on track. What has happened to their reading comprehension?
As we wrap up this podcast on chapter 1, what can readers expect from it as a whole? What are some of the key takeaways?
In this first shift, we start by exploring 4 misunderstandings about how reading comprehension develops, and then challenge teachers to reconsider the all too common practice of under-attending to listening comprehension and oral language development.
And we back it all up with lots of research, Dan, and we spend a good chunk of the chapter giving readers really practical guidance on how they can shift their practices. And because there was more content that we wanted to share than could be squeezed into the book, each chapter has some free goodies housed on our website, the6shifts.com, that readers may want to check out as they're working through the book.
Shifting the Balance: 6 Ways to Bring the Science of Reading into the Balanced Literacy Classroom by Jan Berkens and Kari Yates is available from Stenhouse Publishers. Follow Jan Berkens online at Dr. Jan Berkens and www.drjanberkens.com. Follow Kari Yates at Kari_Yates. And be sure to check out www.the6shifts.com. We hope you enjoyed listening to The 6 Shifts with Jan Berkens and Kari Yates. Future episodes will look more closely at each shift. We'd love to hear your feedback. Get in touch with us at marketing@stenhouse.com. And please share this with your colleagues who you think would enjoy it too. Thanks for listening.